Okay, let's see how many we've got on the call. So we're at 35 just now. I think Natalie, presenting today's session will be Natalie and Emily, the same people who very kindly presented last week. So Natalie, if you're ready.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe you should take over.
Cool. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming this morning. So today, as Elliott mentioned, we're going to be discussing social media marketing. So last week we spoke about content marketing in general, which included, obviously, one of the elements of it is social media marketing. So today what we would like to do is go to social media marketing in a little bit more detail and just basically exclusively focus on that. It's going to have a similar structure as last week. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys now, and then I'll talk you through the points that we're going to cover in our presentation. Okay. Perfect. So hopefully you can all see the presentation. So the way we've structured this presentation, as I mentioned, is similar to last week. So we're going to quickly touch on the social landscape, the different channels that we're going to be covering, and sort of why social media marketing is so important. And then we're going to dive straight into the 10-step process to creating your social media strategy and planning. And then we're going to touch on some useful tools specifically for social media, and then some common social media mistakes and tips, and yeah, best practices as well. We're going to get started. So starting with the social media landscape, obviously last week we covered content in general and why content is so important. So we're not going to kind of reiterate that so much this week, but we're going to share some useful and interesting stats with you that will help sort of strengthen why social media is so important. This basically shows you these stats are UK only stats, and they're from January 2019, so they're from about a year old. So they probably will be a little bit higher this year. But on average, there's basically 45 million total active users on social media in the UK, which basically represents 67% of the total population. So the majority of the population will have a social media account and will be active on those social media accounts. In terms of people using it from their mobile, it's about 39 million active users access their social media platforms via mobile, which is basically 58% of the total population. Obviously, the percentage will change depending on the social media platform at hand, because some social media platforms are pretty much exclusively visited on mobile, and some kind of are split between desktop and mobile. But overall, people will access their social media platforms from their mobile phones. And quite a shocking stat is the fact that on average, a user will spend 1 hour and 50 minutes on a social media platform per day, which is huge. So almost 2 hours of users' times are spent, 2 hours a day are spent on social media. Moving on here, this basically, again, shows you how active people are on social media. So 96% of those who visit or use social networks have visited it in the last month, so are active on a monthly basis. And 77% of those are actually contribute and engage on a monthly basis. So they're highly engaged when they are using their social media platforms. Quite a shocking metric as well is the fact that on average, each internet user has 7.1 social media accounts, which when I first saw this metric, I was like, how is that possible? But then you start counting the number of social media accounts that you actually have. And I personally have 7 as well. So it's shocking because we don't realize actually how many profiles we have online and how many social media platforms we tend to visit throughout a month. And then the final metric is the fact that 13% of internet users use social media for work purposes. Now, I know this metric isn't huge, but it also shouldn't be disregarded because 13% of the population of internet users is still a huge amount of people. So even though it's not a very, very large percentage, it is still a really large population in size. So even if your your client or you yourselves are very much B2B and niche, there is still a huge opportunity out there to be using social media to help you achieve your goals. So obviously social media, the difference between sort of social media marketing and the wider content marketing that we discussed last week is the fact that social media is very much about engaging with your users, engaging with your audience, and all about, that customer relationship, both for existing customers and also potential new customers. So it is all about nurturing those relationships with your target audience. So this is just quite an interesting screenshot that we added in here. Again, this is taken from January 2019, so it's about a year old, and it's UK only data. But it basically shows the percentage of internet users using each platform. This does take into consideration as well Messenger and like messaging and chat systems, which are in red. But overall, you can see that YouTube, 80% of internet users are on YouTube and use YouTube, followed by Facebook. Then you've got some chat services, and then it's followed by Instagram. For me, the most interesting thing here was to see that actually, even though WhatsApp is so widely used, it still represents a smaller percentage of the internet users than YouTube, for example, or Facebook does. So you still do, even though it is, for me, a little bit hard to believe, but it is true that more people use Facebook and YouTube than they actually are spending time on WhatsApp. So that's just an interesting thing that we wanted to share with you guys. And you can see all the other social media platforms below and the percentage of people that use them in general. So we're going to dive straight into it. The 10-step process of creating your social media strategy. So the steps are pretty clear, and we're going to go through them one by one in this presentation. It is, again, a similar step-by-step process than it was for creating your overall content marketing strategy. So similar to last week, with a few changes, and obviously the contents are different. So it all starts again with setting your goal, and then knowing your audience and auditing what you currently have, looking at your competitors, and optimizing the profiles that you have, or setting them up if you don't have them already. And then it's all about sort of creating that content. So finding inspiration, creating a calendar, adjusting, publishing, monitoring, analyzing all of that stuff, and engaging, which is a really, really important part of social media marketing. So number one, set your goals. I'm going to hand over to Emily here, and she's going to take you through this.
Yeah, so if anyone's here today that wasn't last week, I'm Emily. So yeah, step one is setting your goals. Nat, could you just try and press forward? So there's a couple bits missing.
Oh.
There we go.
There we go.
So like any sort of marketing, you should always try to make sure that your social media goal is reflective of your business objective. When it comes to organic, so it's quite often that people tend to go for kind of vanity metrics, which isn't always the best way to go. So what I mean by vanity metrics is things like your follower count and the amount of likes you're getting on each post. And they're referred to as vanity metrics because there's something which might look good on paper, but ultimately might not be leading you towards your goal. So for example, I think some of you guys work in luxury travel. You might be doing really well on social, say you have 100,000 followers on Twitter, but if all of them followers are maybe of a low income and might not be able to afford luxury trips, then it might be better to actually have 1,000 really strong followers who are all really high and looking for these type of trips on a frequent basis. So you need to really think what you want to get out of your social before anything. So looking at this table, just a quick overview. If your business objective is about growing your brand, then your social media goal might be about your reach. So the metrics you might be looking at are reach, impressions, mentions, or your share of voice. And your share of voice is basically how many people are talking about your brand in comparison to your competitors. If your business objective is about turning customers into advocates, so generating interest, your social media goal might be about engagement. So this is where the kind of vanity metrics come in. So you look at your follower count, amount of likes, favorites, shares, retweets, or inbound website links. If your business objective is about driving leads or sales, your social media goal might be about an investment. That's direct sales revenue, leads conversions, or support cost per customer. So that last one is essentially the value added to customers through social. It can be a bit harder to track, but it's anything which essentially has led them into making a decision to make a purchase. The last one is about improving customer retention. So your social media goal again will be retention and loyalty. And this will look at things like your reviews and ratings, issues resolved, your service level agreement, which is essentially when someone has messaged you, how long does it take you on average to respond to them? Your time to resolution, which is similar, but instead of your first time to reply, it's how long does it take to actually resolve the issue with them. Customer satisfaction or sentiment. I know there was a question last week on sentiment, so there's a slide a bit later on which goes into a bit more detail on that. And we'd recommend looking at these goals and reviewing them about every 6 months to a year. And these all might vary from platform to platform depending on your goal and where your audience is. So is knowing your audience.
So with knowing your audience, we covered last week, again, like a step-by-step process on how to analyze your audience and understand them a little bit more. But essentially, it basically falls into three points, which is definitely try to create audience personas. So when you're trying to reach your audience and you know who it is, whether it's like new potential audience or existing audiences or whatever it may be, definitely don't try to go for your entire audience all at once. It's definitely better to try to segment your audience into smaller personas and smaller groups, so that you can cater the content for each of these groups as motivators, you know, who they are, what their pain points are, what the type of content that they're likely to engage with is. So definitely segment them, create personas, and then try to target these personas separately rather than target the whole audience all at once. If possible, definitely use real data rather than assumptions, and which ties into the second point, which is using social media analytics. So as much as possible, use data to dictate who your audience is and what their behaviors are, what their patterns are, all of that stuff. Don't exclusively rely on assumptions and what you think your audience is and how they behave. So use data and segment your audience. These are the most important points. So in this section, what we've decided to do is, instead of kind of reiterating how to understand your audience and how to segment your audience, we're going to go through each of the main social media platforms and discuss some statistics about the audiences that use these platforms, because each platform is slightly different in terms of who uses it. So starting with Facebook, Facebook is probably one of the biggest platforms in terms of active monthly users. It has 2.5 billion monthly users, which are active. This is global data. So if any of the data, we use some data as well from the US and some from the UK, I will point these out, but the metrics on the left are all global. In terms of the age breakdown, 86% of people aged 18 to 29 have a Facebook account. So pretty much the vast majority of 18 to 29-year-olds will use Facebook. Also, the vast majority of people between the ages of 30 and 49 also use Facebook, 77%. And then for users between ages 50 and 65, about half of them will use Facebook. and about 34% of those older than 65 also will use Facebook. One observation, though, from having worked on Facebook advertising and organic Facebook posting, we've noticed that even though the older audience is smaller in terms of percentage, they are generally a lot more engaged and a lot more likely to engage with content than the younger audience. That could be for multiple reasons. It could be that, the younger audience is generally more skeptical towards everything that they see online, and they're very selective about the type of content that they engage with and what they engage with. And then also, I think the younger audiences tend to be bombarded with content, with targeted content and paid for content as well, which means that they're just, there's an overload of content that they're being shared. So it's probably why they're also a little bit less likely to engage with content than an older audience. In terms of the gender split, it's pretty much 50-50, but it leans a little bit higher towards females, 54% women and 46% of Facebook users are men. And on average, Facebook users spend 35 minutes a day on the platform. 96% of the audience basically visit it on mobile devices, and 25% also visit it on laptops or desktops. So you still have some laptop and desktop activity, but it is predominantly mobile devices from which it's being accessed. The screenshot on the right is an interesting one because it shows the engagement rates depending on the type of content that you're sharing on the Facebook platform. This is UK data. So if the Facebook post is just a simple post, it's just written, it's not really accompanied by anything else, the engagement rate that we tend to see is 3.82%. This is for organic Facebook posts. Now, if that post is accompanied by a video, then the engagement rate immediately doubles and it's at 6.96%, which is so much higher, and the engagement rates are so much higher. Similarly, when a Facebook post is accompanied by an image, you also have significantly higher engagement rates at 5.48%. And when the post is accompanied by a link, it's 3.81%, which is comparable to basically not having anything. It's just being a text. The reason for this is generally Facebook and all other social media platforms want their users to stay on the platform. They don't want to be sending users outside the platform. And the reason for this is obviously the more people are spending time on the platform, the more they're scrolling, the more they're being served ads, impressions for ads. So the more time you spend on a platform, the more Facebook can actually monetize your time spent on the site. So sometimes the algorithms that the platforms use will kind of work against posts that include links, external links, because it won't want you to actually leave the site. Having said that, it's still worth sharing links when relevant, because ultimately, when you are served an impression, and if that link and that content is useful to the user, people will engage with it and they will click on it. And then finally, the least, I guess, engagement-worthy type of post is just a Facebook status. But to be honest, not a lot of people use those anymore, so that'll be fine. So that was Facebook. Moving on to Instagram. Instagram has 1 billion monthly active users per month. So it's a little bit lower than Facebook. However, on the orange sticky note on the side, you can see that actually 500 million, so 500 million users are active daily. So even though it's a little bit smaller in size than Facebook is, people are generally just a lot more active on that platform. In terms of the age breakdown, 67% of people aged 18 to 69, again globally, use Instagram. 47% of people aged 30 to 49 use that platform, 23% between 50 and 64, and then only 8% who are aged 65 plus use Instagram. So it is a significantly younger audience on the Instagram platform, as opposed to Facebook, which is pretty much almost evenly spread across ages. But there's significantly more older audiences aged 50 plus on Facebook than they are on Instagram. So it is a younger audience. In terms of gender, again, it's pretty much 50-50. So 51% of the users are female and 49% are male. And average time spent on the site is a lot higher than Facebook. So on average, Instagram users spend 53 minutes a day on the platform. So nearly an hour on the platform a day from Instagram users. So not only are they just more active, they're also more engaged and they spend more time on the platform. It is predominantly mobile platform, so the majority of people will be, if not all people, will be using it from a mobile device. In the green sticky note on the side as well, found some interesting metrics here. They are from US data, but it says that 71% of US businesses have an Instagram account. So the majority of businesses will use Instagram. But also, more interestingly, 83% of users say that they discover new products and services on Instagram. I'm definitely one of those people. When I'm targeted or when I discover new brands on Instagram, I am actually likely to, purchase these products eventually. It's a really good way to start engaging and creating awareness about a product or a service on that platform. Moving on to Twitter. So Twitter has a significantly smaller market share, I guess, with 330 million monthly active users. However, users on Twitter are generally very passionate about topics. They definitely like to engage a lot. So from an engagement point of view, it is a really positive platform. In terms of age distribution, again, it is, you do have quite a bit of younger audiences. So 38% of people use it between ages 18 and 29 use Twitter. 26% of people aged 30 to 49. 17 people aged 50 to 64, and only 7% of people aged 65 plus. So all of the percentages are lower, but it is basically used between users between ages 18 and 50. It's a 100% 50-50 basically split between males and females. And on average, Twitter users spend 3.39 minutes per session. So it is a smaller time spent on the platform. It is also predominantly visited on mobile. The screenshot on the right shows the breakdown by country. So what are the leading countries in terms of Twitter users? So by far, it's the biggest country for Twitter is the US. It's then followed by Japan, but the UK is the third biggest market for Twitter, with 16.7 million users as of January 2020. So there's still quite a big, potential audience here for that channel. Additionally, on the side, you can see that 67% of B2B businesses are using Twitter as a digital marketing tool. So it is useful for more of a B2B audience because Twitter is more of a news type of outlet, and it's also great for people who want to follow business specific and industry specific news and updates. And then 77% of Twitter users have a better impression of a brand when they respond to a tweet, and that was taken from last year's data. And then in Q3 of 2019, so at the very end of last year, ad engagement on Twitter was up by 23% as well. So engagement is increasing on that platform. A lot of people use Twitter definitely from a customer service point of view because it is a conversational platform ultimately. And people do expect responses. There's a lot of like debates that happen on Twitter. So it's all about really engaging with the audience that you have. It may not be as big as Facebook, Instagram, or other social media platforms, but it's really, really important for engaging and building relationships with your customers. And it's great for brand perception as well. Moving on to LinkedIn. So LinkedIn has a similar size as Twitter. It has 303 million monthly active users. Again, this is globally. In terms of the age, actually, this is a little bit different from the other platforms, where the majority of people who use it are between ages of 25 and 34. So 60% of people within that age bracket use LinkedIn. Only 21% of people aged 18 to 24 use LinkedIn. Obviously, for obvious reasons, they are probably still at university or they're still studying. So normally people will start becoming active on LinkedIn once they enter the workforce and they're starting to sort of build their careers. 17% of people aged 35 to 54 use LinkedIn, and only 3% of people aged 5 plus use it. So it's mainly young professionals that are on there. In terms of gender, it's more male than it is female. So 57% of LinkedIn users are male and 43% are female. I mean, this is the case because unfortunately the workforce is still has more men than women, but you know, that's the case. And then from a time point of view, on average, LinkedIn users spend 6 minutes and 7 seconds per session. The devices that are used, it's almost 50-50. So this is probably the only social media channel where you still have a lot of people visiting it from a laptop or a desktop. Again, it's because it is very much a business platform. So a lot of people will be visiting it from their work, from their desktops as they're working, rather than their mobiles. So that's why it's the only one that still has a laptop presence. And then another interesting fact is just the fact that the US actually has the highest number of active users on the platform with 160 million users. And then it's followed by India. And that's the second biggest market with 61 million users. And I looked up the UK, and the UK has 28 million users on LinkedIn as well. So moving on to YouTube. YouTube has 2 billion monthly active users. And it's probably the only channel that has almost an even distribution in terms of age. So you still have mostly 81% of people who aged 15 to 25 that you use YouTube. But it's really interesting to see that even as the age brackets go up, you're still having a really big percentage of that age bracket that use YouTube. So it is basically a platform for everyone, literally. And you know, everyone's using it. 58% of people over the ages of 56 use YouTube as well. So again, in terms of the gender, it is evenly split, you know, maybe a little bit more skewed to females. So over 50% of YouTube users are female. And then on average, YouTube users spend 11 minutes and 43 seconds per day on the platform. You still have people watching YouTube videos on their desktops, on laptops. You can even obviously watch YouTube on your TV as well if you have a smart TV. So YouTube is one of those social media platforms that has more devices being used than any other platform, but it's still predominantly mobile device based, 70%. So just also one interesting fact is that you have 1 billion hours. I mean, you can't even comprehend that, but like 1 billion hours of YouTube videos content is way, like, yeah, can't even visualize what 1 billion hours means. So everything is that Facebook and YouTube are still in the US, looking at US data, by far, if you can look at the curves there, the most used platforms than any other social media platforms online. So it's really easy to get caught into those like new platforms that are popping up, the smaller platforms. Like now there's TikTok, everyone's talking about TikTok, but ultimately at the end of the day, YouTube and Facebook are still the most used platforms across probably all ages in the US, but also globally. Finally, I just want to quickly touch on Snapchat and TikTok. So Snapchat has 210 million monthly active users. And in terms of age distribution, it is a pretty young audience. So 53% of people aged 15 to 25 use it, but then as you kind of go up in the age brackets, that drops significantly. And it is very much more weighted towards a female audience. So 61% of Snapchat users globally are female and 38% are male. On average, Snapchat users spend 30 minutes per day on the platform. So that's quite a high number. And the reason for this is because it is also, in a way, a very visual chat service. A lot of people are chatting, commenting. There's a lot of like content to engage with. So people do spend quite a bit of time on that platform. And the newest, most trendy platform is TikTok, which interestingly has very, very quickly exceeded the active monthly users that Snapchat has. So it's 800 million monthly active users, which is huge. And most of these users are very young. So they're aged 16 to 24. So it is a very, very young platform. And also a lot of the audience actually is in China, which is really interesting because China has been it's really tricky to target audiences in China because certain platforms are restricted there and they have their own platforms, etc. But the fact that 60% of users actually reside in China means that there's an opportunity here to actually target China as an audience, especially a young audience, by using platforms that we have access to as well. So that's just an opportunity to see. And then on average, TikTok users are spending 46 minutes per day consuming videos that are typically only 15 seconds long. So that is a lot of time spent on the platform and a lot of videos that are being watched. TikTok also have started opening up their advertising capabilities. So we as an agency actually have access to TikTok advertising, and we're starting to use it for some of our university clients because obviously their target audience is within this age bracket, 16 to 24. So we're just starting to tap into that now. It is a little bit more on the expensive side, but it's seeing the engagement rates here, I'm sure it will be a very effective platform from an advertising point of view as well. Cool. So this is just a quick overview of some of the platforms. So we didn't cover all of these. So for example, we didn't necessarily cover Pinterest. The reason for this is that Pinterest is only relevant for a specific type of industry. So we decided to keep that out for now. But this just gives you some additional information here as to the strengths of each platform. So Facebook, for example, it sends more website traffic than any other social media platform because it's pretty much one of the main platforms that allows you to still have a link on the actual post. Instagram, for example, you're unable to do that. It's geared towards both news and entertainment, so it has that nice balance. And it has currently a really strong emphasis on video content, and that's where we see most of the engagement on that platform. Instagram is, as you know, very, very visual, so it's great for imagery and short videos and making things look really, really beautiful and visual, so it's great from a branding point of view. It's obviously not optimal for driving traffic because you are unable to add a link into your post. You have to add it to your bio and then get people to visit your bio to click through, so it's just a bit of a clunky process. And yeah, as I mentioned, it's really, really good for building a strong visual brand. Twitter is very much a news platform, which is really good because it allows you to also share kind of newsworthy or valuable content. Retweeting is very much encouraged, so you will get a lot of shares on Twitter if your content is strong. And it's really good for, like I mentioned, brands that have blog posts or really interesting website content. It's really, really good for that sort of thing, because that's what people are there to see: interesting, useful, valuable content. LinkedIn obviously is a professional network, and your content needs to be professional as well. Otherwise, it will be very out of place and you just won't see the results that you desire. It's heavily used for sharing articles and professional content as well. And basically they launched Pulse in 2015, which is like a built-in publishing platform as well. Google Plus, it says here that 29% of internet users are active on that network. However, Google Plus, I mean, you automatically get a Google Plus account when you have a Google account, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend having a Google Plus strategy. But you can have an overall Google strategy, which involves YouTube and then obviously other elements of content marketing like search, blogs, etc. We found this visual, which we thought was quite interesting because it breaks down network recommendations by industry. Obviously, this doesn't cover all industries, but you can see retail, media, sports, like finance, healthcare, etc. And then the green ones are basically the platforms that are ideal for that specific industry. Gray depends on the content strategy and what type of content you're sharing. And red, it's not really relevant. So for example, if we look at financial services, Facebook is a good platform for that. Twitter definitely, because also Twitter's targeting capabilities are good, but we're talking about organic here, but you can use really relevant hashtags. LinkedIn, of course, is super relevant for the financial services, but then if you think about Instagram very visual, so it's maybe not very relevant for financial services. And then YouTube and Snapchat really depends. I would say Snapchat, no, personally. So take this with a pinch of salt. But YouTube could be interesting if you're sharing kind of tips, or if you have like products within a financial services industry, you can have how-to type of videos on there. So it can still be really relevant. And then there's on the side as well some interesting information about which platforms are best suited for teens, for example. So Instagram and Snapchat, and now recently TikTok, are great for that audience. Millennials, Facebook and Instagram. And then if you're trying to reach, for example, a predominantly male audience, YouTube is great for a male audience as well. Cool. So step 3 is conducting a social media audit. Again, we've spoken about this last week, so I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail today. But these are basically the steps that need to be done when you're assessing your current social media landscape. Number 1 is audience analysis. So obviously analyzing the audience that you currently have on your social media platforms using the tools that we discussed last week and some of the tools that we'll mention today. Definitely competitor, really important. So looking at what your competitors are doing on those social media channels, how much followers do they have, what type of content they're sharing, all of that stuff, because that will allow you to set up your profiles in the best way possible. And also get inspiration from what seems to be working and not working on their platforms. Revising your profile setup. So relook at how you've set up your profiles, identify if there's any gaps there. Once you've looked at your competitors as well, see if they have certain elements on their profiles that you can have as well. Just make sure that your profiles are nicely set up as well and revise that. Look at the actual post engagement and the quality of the posts that you've been sharing, and look at the back end of that. So look at the analytics and insights that you can draw from that. What times were most effective when you posted? What type of content was the content that generated most engagement? So yeah, definitely analyze all those metrics. And finally, benchmark all of that stuff. Keep a record of all of these things and all of these observations that you've done, because eventually, as you're building your social media strategy and you're starting to implement your plan, you want to be able to look back at where you were when you started and see how your social media strategy is allowing your profiles to evolve and helping you reach your goals. So keep a record of everything that that you've audited. Cool. So number 4, research your competition.
Okay, so this one can kind of fit into the social media audit, but we've just put it as a separate step here to go into it a bit more detail. So if you have the next slide. So we've kind of put this as 3 key purposes of why you want to know your competitors, but all of these you can kind of branch out and think of a lot of other reasons why it's beneficial as well. So the first one is knowing what's expected of your industry. So while doing this, you might find that there are certain topics which are key for you to get involved in, to talk about, or a certain way to respond to certain things. Know what your competitors are doing well and what they're not. So there might be aspects which will be very difficult for you to kind of be really competitive and overtake them doing, but there might be other things that they're not doing so well, and you can kind of jump on board and effectively not steal their audience, but in a sly way, just say we're here too and we're great at doing this, which they're not so great at. And 3, help you set your own targets. So especially if you're someone who's starting out, it can be good to see how others in your industry are doing, so you have something to kind of know what's normal and what's achievable. So we'll move on to social listening. So it's my understanding that at the minute you guys have a social listening platform, but at the moment you don't necessarily think you're utilising it to its full potential. So correct me if I'm wrong on that, but for those unfamiliar from it, social listening is essentially listening before you speak. So in step 1, it's kind of monitoring social channels for mention of your brand, products and services, competitors, hashtags, and keywords related to your brand. This step is also sometimes referred to as social monitoring. That's essentially looking backwards, seeing what people are talking about, what people like, what's working well and what's not. So then in step 2, you can take this data, analyse it and see how it can be incorporated into your future strategy. So if you go to next. So how do you do this? So yeah, as I said, I know you guys do have a tool at the moment, but I'm not sure if everyone has access to this. So if you don't, there are some things you can do without any tools directly on social media platforms themselves. So firstly, follow your competitors. Easy way to doing what they're sharing and see if that will influence you in any way. Follow influencers, again, see what they're talking about, see what they like. So they'll clearly have a big impact on all of their followers. And it's good sometimes, if you can, build relationships with these people as to, again, have an impact on all of their followers. Follow hashtags. So this might be general things to do with your industry, or it might be something to do with your brand specifically, like a campaign hashtag. Again, you can track how many people are talking about this and what kind of way they're talking about it. Join groups. I think this mainly applies to Facebook groups. Again, seeing how people are talking and what they're discussing. Brand keywords. I think on Twitter about 30% of brand mentions don't actually include the Twitter handles. So sometimes you need to search for your brand name or something similar to actually see where you are being mentioned, because you don't always get a notification from this. And obviously there are a lot of tools available which kind of brings all this together, one easy way to keep track of everything and I guess make sure you don't miss anything. And these can also offer a bit of more insight and I guess present the data in an easy to read way. It saves a bit of time for you. So essentially there are kind of 8 key benefits of social listening. Some you might be aware of, some you might not be yet. So the first is assessing performance of your content strategy. So essentially you can keep track of the levels of engagement, but not only that, you can kind of go a bit deeper and say, okay, why did that work well? Was it a certain topic, a certain format, a certain I don't know, length of your comment or character count, sorry. And I guess you can use that to then influence your social media strategy, but maybe even your wider content strategy or marketing strategy even. The second is engaging with your customers. This might be directly within your direct messages or your mentions, but it might also be where people haven't necessarily used your Twist handle, for example. So really just making sure you're responding to everywhere your brand is being mentioned or talks about. Address and avoid PR disasters and manage reputation. So again, if someone is talking about you negatively, can you kind of acknowledge that early on so it doesn't get bigger, more people don't have the same issue? And it might be something which affects your wider business. Say if there's a fault with a product, social listening might help you recognize that and influence decisions being made maybe in your development of products. So it can really influence your whole business rather than just your social media. Again, as we said, track competitors. You can see what's working well for them and what's not. It might be that they're really bad at responding to people who are mentioning their brands if they're having an issue. So it's good, you don't necessarily want to target these people trying to sell your products instead, but if you can maybe offer them a bit of help, they might grow a bit fonder of your brand and maybe consider changing to you in the future. The next one, find pain points. So there might be something being discussed in your industry which is a certain problem. It might be that you have a product already which you can slightly tweak or adjust to then specifically answer people's problem that they're having, which will help like existing customers of the industry, but might also introduce new ones as well. Discover new sales leads. Again, people hate being sold to right away. So on social media, there's always a chance to connect with them in a different way, offering them some useful information or forming a relationship before you try to hit that hard sell. Identify influencers and advocates. Again, it's always good to connect with these people. This might be big influencers who you might have to spend a lot of time building a relationship for them to eventually maybe mention your brand or post your product. Or it might be natural brand advocates. So these might be a bit smaller, but people who are already talking about your brands. So you want to connect with them and form a bigger relationship so they talk about you more and recommend you more. And lastly, assess brand sentiment. So sometimes people focus a bit too much on the numbers. It might be great saying you have thousands of followers, thousands of engagements. But if you look a bit deeper and over half of these are actually negatives, that number suddenly doesn't seem so good because there's negative criticism rather than all being positive. So this is just a look at what this sentiment might look like. So yeah, sentiment summary is essentially putting emotion behind the numbers, digging a bit deeper into what people are actually saying about your brands rather than knowing simply that they are talking about you. One thing to say about this is that it is essentially computers and AI trying to understand human language, so it never will be 100% accurate. So say someone has posted something in a very sarcastic way, AI will likely take the literal meaning of it, whereas the person obviously meant the opposite. And you can kind of see that in this table. So the bottom bar across the bottom says 17% positive, 24% negative, 59% unrated. So that might be some of them, there's not really a strong positive or negative, but some of that will be that AI actually can't read it at all. And this will vary between platform to platform, but I think the average kind of leeway is about 20%. So if you're looking at that 17 and 24, you could say that either of them are going to be 20% higher or lower. So it is a really big gap between them. So you should never look at this really intently and look at 58% compared to 57% next week. Like that doesn't really matter. What's good with this is that you can benchmark rough figures to try and improve on week. And also you can benchmark against your competitors. So if you can take kind of rough idea of how well you are being spoken about against them, you know kind of where you stand against them. And lastly, the thing to say with this, you can see kind of, again, this is only in some platforms, I'm not sure where it's always available, but you can see if there are certain days spiked either positively or negatively, and actually click into them to assess, okay, why was that? What did we do really well this day? What worked well? To then use in future. Or similarly, if something works really badly, had a really poor effect, you can make sure that you don't do that again in future. Next one. So yeah, essentially social listening allows you to build relationship, brand reputation, and discover new opportunities and threats through listening to what people are already saying about you.
Cool. Setting up or improving your profiles is step 5. So once you're about to start, definitely it's important to kind of go through your profiles, amend them, and create new ones if you don't have them already. So these are just a few points to consider when you are reviewing your profiles and you want to optimize them. So firstly, have a look at all of the social media platforms that you already have. And then review the username and the handle that you've been using. You definitely want to make sure that it's updated, as updated as possible, and that it is consistent between the different platforms. If it's possible to use the same handle across all of your platforms, that would be ideal. But if that's not possible, if it is already taken, then try to amend it in a logical way, and try to make sure that they are as consistent as possible across all of the platforms. Similarly, also review your profile picture and the cover photo that you are using on the different platforms. Again, make sure that one's updated, that it fits properly, because each platform also has a different format that you have to have for the profile picture and the cover photo, if that's available. So make sure that it's fitting nicely, it looks good, it's again consistent across the different platforms as well. It's really, really important that your pages look really professional and really reflect your brand nicely. Then it's looking at the bio and all of the description fields within the profiles, all the about sections, all of that stuff. Make sure that they're all filled out. Don't leave any blanks if possible, because the more information you're sharing, the better, and also your competitors are likely to be sharing all of that information as well. So just make sure that there's nothing that you're missing out on. So fill everything out, include your locations, include links to your other social media channels, include a link to your website, opening hours if you have them, as much detail as possible. And when you are linking to your website, for example, do use a UTM link. So UTM links, essentially, they're like unique URLs, and you can generate them really easily. You can just Google basically UTM builder on Google, click on the first one, you put your link in, you say, you kind of define what you wanted to say. So how would you be able to identify it? So you can say like Facebook, website, and then you'll know that it came from your Facebook. And yeah, then it generates a unique link, and you can put that in there, and you can shorten it as well. So definitely use that, because then once you can visit your Google Analytics of your website, and you can see how much traffic is coming from that specific platform from people clicking on your about section. Check your social media links. So when you're actually also on your website, if you have a website, definitely check all of the social media links and make sure that they are all correct, because you don't want to be sending people from your website onto your social media platforms that are wrong. And then likewise, if you're linking to other social media platforms from Facebook, for example, make sure that all of those links are also correct. Make sure that you are discoverable in the social media searches. Social media in a way can also be optimized. You can also use specific keywords within your description sections, and in general, like within the content of your social media pages, to make sure that you are visible. But mainly just make sure that your handle is also visible and you're easy to find. from a social media point of view. If possible, pin your best posts to the top. So definitely review the content that's already on your social media pages if they've existed already. Go through them, and if there's any content that you've shared in the past and now you're looking at it and you're like, no, this doesn't serve any purpose, it's outdated, it uses, for example, really old branding, or anything where you're kind of, it's probably not adding anything or even might be harmful to your brand, just get rid of it. And then pin the best ones at the very top until you start basically posting, and then eventually that'll be a different story. And then finally, just be aware of the different platforms, formats, dimensions, restrictions, all of that stuff, so that when you go away to create your calendar, you know exactly what are the optimal sizes and dimensions and things like that for each channel. And then this is just one thing to keep in mind as well. It might be helpful to also have a strategy for each of these channels. So just be clear on how you want to differentiate each channel, and what your objective is going to be for each. So this was an example that we put in here. For example, for Benefit Cosmetics, their social media manager basically said that for makeup tutorials, they're using Snapchat, Instagram stories, likely to be using also YouTube. But for example, Twitter is very much about customer service, communicating with their existing customers and making sure that everyone is really, really happy. So it might be good to actually write a mission statement for each of your channels as well, while you're kind of going through in that setup phase, setting up the platforms and optimizing them and making sure that you're very clear on each and every platform's purpose. Cool. Step 6 is finding inspiration. Oops, sorry. There we go. So before you also get started with actually planning your content out, it's useful to just have a bit of a brainstorm or finding ways to get inspiration for your content. So obviously there's various ways to do that, but these are just a few tips. So social listening is one of them. Obviously, Emily has already mentioned social listening, but it's really useful to actually review what people are talking about, and how people are referencing your brand. What are they mentioning? Because then that allows you to address any of their pain points if you are identifying them, or pain points in the industry in general. Understanding sort of the sentiment in general around your brand. That way you know what type of content you need to be sharing to sort of respond to that. And also understanding sort of what your competitors are doing. Is there any areas where they're failing at, and that will also, all of that will give you inspiration as to what type of content you need to be sharing. Ask your team, speak internally about what type of content you would like to see, your team would like to see, what they've seen in general online happening and going on. All of these things can help. And if you can, also share success stories. These can be found on social media. People will be talking about them, but also if you know of any and your internal team knows of any, that's a great kind of type of content to share. Ask your followers and ask them what type of content they want to see. It's always great. You get a lot of inspiration from actually engaging with your existing customers and your followers and letting them tell you basically what they want to see. Looking at industry sources. So just showing that you're on top of making sure that you're on top of relevant changes and industry changes and things like that. And yeah, just generally showing that you sharing that information with your audience. And then we personally like to put together a social media mood board. So as and when we're using social media for personal purposes, or when we're doing a bit of a look around to find inspiration, definitely screenshot some of the posts that you thought were interesting, even if they're not relevant to your industry specifically. If you found that they did a thing, a type of post in a creative way, it's a little bit more unusual, it stands out, it's cool, you like it, just take a bunch of screenshots of all of that stuff and put them all in a folder in one place. And then you can always go back to them at one point when you're trying to think of a new content piece, you're trying to think of it, find inspiration. You can always look back at that sort of archive of different posts that you've enjoyed and you've engaged with, and that can help you find inspiration as well. And then also laying out how you would like your social media channels to look and feel as well. So these are just a few ideas on how to sort of find inspiration for your content.
Okay, as we move on to creating your actual social media calendar. So yeah, when creating your calendar, your content mix within your calendar should always be reflective of your mission statement. And this might be, you might set objectives for your social media in total, or it might be specific objectives for each platform separately. So if you go on to the next slide, there's a couple examples of how this might be split out. So the first one is just an example. So you could have 50% of content will drive traffic back to your blog, 25% of content will be created from other sources, so user-generated content. 20% of content will support enterprise goals like selling and leads generation, and 5% of content will be about HR and company culture. And this might change as months go on. Something might become more important or change within your goals. But starting out, there's kind of two ways which are suggested, just to start off your implementation and see what works to then change from this. And so these are the 80-20 rule and the social media rule of thirds. So as you can see, the first one is 80% what you really want to focus on, 20%, okay, this we still want to put out on our social media, but maybe isn't quite as important. And the social media rule of thirds, as it says, 3 different things equally important, which you want to present across your social media. And again, this might be the rule for your social media plan in total, or this might be on, say, 1 for Twitter, 1 for Facebook, 1 for Instagram, just for example. Going forward. So again, like we said last week about content marketing, within your social media content, you should be considering selecting your topics and your formats together. So choosing your topic. So firstly, think what's the relation to your business? Is it about your customers? Is it about your employees? Is it about your product, services, your company and culture, your industry, or just general news, which effectively applies to everyone? Next, what is it? Was it a query? Can't say the word. Query response, recognition, promotional, updates on news or tips or knowledge sharing. Again, there's probably more that you could add to this list. This is just to get you thinking about the different types of content you could have. And lastly, what value does it offer your audience? This is probably the most important. Again, it's something we said last week. So you've already established what you want out of your social media, but essentially, why does your audience actually want to see it, and why will they be engaging with this? So it could be informational, entertaining, there's a typo there, but thought-provoking, or staying connected. And again, choosing your format. So depending on the platforms you're using, think about what's actually available to you to really diversify your content. So now, say stories is something which is relatively new, but it's something probably every brand should be using. Similarly with live streaming, again, that depends on what platform you're using. You need to check the kind of requirements if you're able to do that, but it's definitely something you should be considering. And really looking at all of these, say what's in your capacity in terms of time, in terms of budget, your resources, what can you do, and what will your audience actually engage with? Okay, so this is just an example calendar template. This is kind of the format we at MintTwist use for ourselves and some of our clients. So on the left, you'll see we have the week, and that's broken down by each day. Then it's followed by your campaign or content type. So you might have a specific campaign which you're running. If not, you might be sourcing this out, saying, okay, what value is this piece offering? What does this relate to? Is it your employees? Is it your customers, etc.? And just having this helps you see how frequently you are posting about certain things, whether it be campaign type, your content type, or a value proposition. So next is the format. Like I said, it might be a newsfeed post, it might be a story, it might be a thread. Again, it helps you just evaluate how frequently you are posting things and how you can mix it up. Then if it is an image post, you put your creatives here. And it's good practice to always make sure that they are kind of the right ratios and will look how you want to on that platform. And then lastly is the actual copy, so the text within the post. It's good practice here to also kind of check your character count. I'd say especially on Twitter, because I think that's the shortest one they have. But it's good practice just so you can confirm your copy here. So if other people need to check it as well, then there's no kind of back and forth when an issue comes up because it's too long. Another thing to say with this is you don't necessarily need something like this. If you have some sort of post scheduling, then you generally can make a calendar on there, but it's, you know, it's up to your personal preference. If you'd like to start on a spreadsheet and then copy it across, again, complete personal choice, but there's two options available there.
It's easier to use a spreadsheet when you have a specific approval process and it needs to go around multiple people and they need to make changes and amends. That's when we would normally recommend having it in like this format. But if you don't have to do that, then you can just use the platform, the scheduling platforms that you use.
Mm-hmm. That being said, if you are paying for some probably bigger platforms, they can offer kind of an approval process. So you can set up specific workflows. Maybe someone puts an image on set for this day, then the next person will need to write the copy, and then a client will approve the text and when it's going through, and then maybe someone at the end will actually push it live. But yeah, generally that's on kind of bigger platforms. I'm not sure if that's something you guys will have at the moment. On this slide, if we just click one more, should get the title as well. There we go. So tone of voice. So these kind of just best practices when writing your copy. So it should be written from the reader's perspective. So if they are reading something, if you're referring to you, it should be to them as the reader. It's just a bit more open and relatable for them. Secondly, you should avoid too much jargon. The social is a place you kind of reach a wider audience, maybe rather than people who always necessarily know your specific industry jargon. And it just sounds a bit more approachable and sociable doing this. And lastly is being consistent across channels. So maybe you have, say, someone running your Twitter account, someone else running your Facebook. So how are you going to make sure that your tone of voice is coming through in the same way across different channels? So bigger brands generally will have some sort of brand book, and tone of voice will be something they've written out very clearly within this. But if you're a smaller, maybe you need to go through some of these questions just to say, how are you talking, and make sure everyone knows that's the way you want to be across all social media. So scheduling, adjusting, and publishing. So as I said, this is an example of a calendar made on one of these scheduling platforms. Scheduling is great because even if you're not within maybe social media specifically, it's often given to people as kind of and on top of their normal role. So posting maybe on a daily basis is something which can easily be missed. So scheduling them in just ensures that doesn't happen. So as I said earlier, you can upload kind of spreadsheets. So if you prefer to make that format, maybe you have the approval process done through a spreadsheet, you can then take that and bulk upload it to these platforms. So it does save some time. You don't have to do each one again and again. So that saves a lot of time. The only thing I would then go in and do is just to click on them and choose this optimal time. So this essentially is a lot of AI working. It will go into your actual platforms. So not only taking say Facebook as a general, but going into your platform and analysing your audience and suggest the best times to publish as to hopefully encourage the highest rates of engagement. This is important as well because most social media platforms have some sort of algorithm which essentially takes when a post is first published and say it got really high engagement in the first hour or so, it's then more likely to show that post to more people. Whereas if you didn't get anything in the first hour, it might restrict who it's being shown to because it takes it as being poor content, really. Okay. So your calendar is a live document. I said this, I think, with your content calendar in general, but even more so with your social media calendar, because it is somewhere you can quickly go in and change things and it should always be up to date. So the first point is adjusting where necessary. So maybe you schedule these posts a month or two in advance. It's good practice to go in maybe every week and just see what is scheduled for that week. See if anything has changed. Maybe you had an event which got cancelled, so you don't want then a post advertising it as still being available. So you might have to take that out. Or something which obviously recent events, we had a few posts scheduled with the caption being, I think, happiness is contagious. With obviously this situation with coronavirus, we then decided maybe contagious isn't the best choice of words, so we changed that. And similarly, real-time marketing, again, this is something you can kind of stay on track of with your scheduling, so staying on track of public holidays and events. So it is kind of good practice to, along with your kind of content calendar, your social media calendar, have a separate thing kind of tracking public holidays, anything happening in your industry which you might want to talk about and you might forget about later on down the line. But obviously some of these will pop out of the blue, so it's good practice just to go in again to make sure you are addressing everything you want to and that you should be talking about. Thirdly, is influencer content. Again, you can have some scheduling towards this. It depends how closely you are working with them, but they might surprise you out of the blue and just post something which you weren't expecting. But again, it's still something you should maybe share or be engaging with on a regular basis. And lastly, user-generated content. So people might be sharing pictures, including your products, your services, or mentioning your brand in any sort of way at any time. So you always do need to be active on your social platforms and see if it's something maybe you want to share across to your own profiles as well. Again, it's something you can plan in to an extent with things like competitions or giveaways. So some of these things where just thinking, I think we're planning one currently for a kids colouring competition. So maybe you'll be preparing on that day saying, okay, we need to be really active on that profile for that day to make sure we're sharing as many entries as possible, etc.
So step 9 is engage, which is probably one of the most important parts of social media marketing because it is essentially the whole point of social media. It's engaging and building relationships with your audience, both existing and potential audience. So engagement is obviously one of the most important parts of this. That looks odd. Essentially, there's 2 types of engagement. There's public engagement, which is basically for the purpose of reaching new customers in the open, but it's very public, so everyone can see the engagement that is happening. And there's the private engagement, which happens basically between closed doors. So it's in closed channels, messengers, things like that. So in terms of public engagement, it's all about being quick and responsive, which is basically what Emily was mentioning earlier. Just listen to what your users are saying and respond as quickly as you can. You use this by manually monitoring posts, looking yourself up, for example, like Emily mentioned, and also using some of the social listening tools as well. So these are just 10 points or tips on how to basically create a positive public engagement. So ultimately, you want people to engage. You want people to talk and comment and ask questions and things like that. But in order to get people to start engaging, you kind of need to initiate the conversation and be the one that triggers the engagement. So first, definitely start by making sure that the posts that you are sharing are initiating this conversation. So ask questions in your posts, host Q&A sessions, like use stories, like Emily mentioned earlier, like just have a Q&A session or a live on stories and try to kind of encourage people to come and talk to you. So make sure that basically you're being quite open and basically ready to talk when you're sharing this content. You can use contests, you can use polls. There's so much type of content and ways that you can use to get people to start talking to you. Then once people start engaging and you're starting to see sort of comments and questions and things like that, when you are responding, definitely give your responses feelings. Don't be too formal or dry. So use emojis, especially if the person using it, the person writing the comment used it. So definitely try to make sure that your responses show the tone of voice and the enthusiasm that you want to send across. Like I said earlier, match your response to the question. So if a user is using emojis, they're using exclamation points and things like that, why not use them too, especially if they help you set a positive tone to your response. Then number 4 is respond quickly and thoroughly. Now, that's, I know, not always very easy, but it is really important. The people expect really quick responses, and not just kind of yes, no, like really quick, and in the sense that you just like quickly respond to someone. You have to be quick, but also the response has to be thought out and thorough, to make sure that we are actually addressing the issue or the concern, or even if it's a positive comment, addressing that as well. Number 5 is engage through social issues. What we mean by that is essentially people are more likely to engage when we're discussing about things that are really going on in the world right now, things that actually matter. So do use that, again, when you're trying to initiate that conversation. Do try to kind of be relevant in the times and come across as if, as a person, not only just as a brand. Find and follow new users. So when people are engaging with you, check them out. Why not give them a follow? If you find people that are engaging with other brands or competitors or things like that, also give them a follow. So have a look at sort of what the other people are, who the other people that are engaging with you are, or engaging with other brands, and you be the person that initiates that relationship with them by finding them and following them. Also, if you get users that are following you and you check them out and you feel like they have interesting content and could be quite an engaged user, also give them a follow back. Keep the conversation going. So you definitely don't want to stop the engagement that's happening and the chats that are going on. So when you're responding, try, if relevant, to end it with an open-ended question. That way you can get other people sort of partaking in your conversation, and you can sort of keep it going and get more engagement. If possible, personalize your responses. So if you are able to see the user's name, for example, then why not mention it? Make it a little bit more personal. It makes it a lot more relatable, and people will appreciate it. Also, if possible, do try to make your responses to users as visual as possible. So in certain cases, you're able to actually attach GIFs, images, and videos to your responses. So definitely do that if it's relevant, especially if it's kind of a fun, quirky type of engagement that's going on. Do send a GIF if it helps with kind of strengthening that relationship. Obviously, some of these don't always work for all industries. I know that, at Fin, some of your clients are very much B2B within the B2B sector. So, in that case, maybe a GIF of like, I don't know, Oprah is not going to be very relevant. So obviously keep in mind your brand guidelines and who your audience is, but it is useful sometimes to do include images and videos when possible, even if it's within a B2B industry. And then finally, create a response strategy and the standardized responses, do's and don'ts and things like that. So be prepared for some of the questions that you're going to be getting, and have a set of like standardized responses, because it depends on the level of engagement that you're receiving. But if you're receiving a lot of engagement, it might be it might be very time consuming actually to engage and respond to all of those comments. So sometimes if you have some standardized responses that you can use for the most frequently asked questions, do use that. And then just generally have almost like, the same way you would have brand guidelines, have kind of like a response guideline strategy, some do's and don'ts, things to not mention, things that, a certain tone of voice to keep, to maintain, whatever it is that you want to avoid or that you want to encourage when it comes to responding with your users. Make sure that that's documented and then that's shared across the people that are going to be doing this piece of work. Secondly, for private engagement, there's mainly two ways that can happen. It's either initiated by you, basically when you create a closed group, you can then invite people to that group, and that's basically you have control over the conversations and who gets in on this group. Or they can be user generated, initiated by the user, and it's when they send you a direct message. So obviously a lot of people will be commenting on your posts and directly engaging for everyone to see, but some people prefer to go through the route of direct messaging. And that's just it's a one-on-one conversation between you and the user. So if you do receive direct messages, basically what we said earlier for the public engagement is pretty much still applies in direct messages as well. The only difference is that, similar to what I said earlier, you might get a large volume of direct messages, and it may be difficult to sort of keep up with that. It does take a lot of time. So one way to actually overcome this challenge is to automate some of the chatting. So you can actually set up messaging bots that help you kind of help users get an immediate response, if you can't get on it immediately yourself. So for example, as soon as someone messages you, you can have a bot set up to directly respond to the customer and be like, thanks so much, we really appreciate your feedback, or thanks so much for getting in touch with us. We'll get like a person basically to speak to you in the next 24 hours. That way they know that, okay, yeah, this is the process and someone's going to speak to me soon. So there is a level of automation that you can do, but definitely do be wary of it, because some people do see it quite negatively. So 52% of consumers say that they get frustrated when brands don't offer any human interaction. So we would highly recommend still having people there to be able to sort of speak directly to the users and build that relationship. But some automation can help you sort of manage that volume if you do get a lot. And direct messaging is also great because it's just kind of a one-on-one. It's a very intimate conversation, and you can really help strengthen the relationships with either existing customers or new potential users. And then for the closed groups, there's a few kind of benefits here as well. So Facebook engagement is actually really, really increasing, like despite like the platforms changing algorithms and decrease in general new users signing up to it. But closed groups even are higher when it comes to engagement. So it really also helps because Facebook changes its algorithms all the time. So even when you have followers and you're trying to reach new followers and new people, it's difficult to do that in an open space sometimes, and to build relationships with people because they may not always see your posts. Whereas in a closed group, you do get notified and you will always see the engagement and the posts that are happening. as a user. So here are some 10 benefits as well of private engagement. Firstly, you have more engagement with your customers and members. Like I said, people are generally a lot more engaged when they're part of a closed group. Your customers and members can then very easily engage with each other, and you can very easily track that. You are able to somewhat protect your members' data, so it's not like very much in the open when you're having those conversations. They feel probably more comfortable to share certain information and to engage because they don't feel like it's just such an open, uncontrolled space. You are able to then provide extra value for customers. You're able to sort of create a sense of community, a sense of exclusiveness. They really feel important and valued. Like I mentioned earlier, you're able to potentially beat the algorithms and make sure that your content is always being seen by those really high value customers. And you're able to also sort of collect user-generated content because people will be more likely to share content on those platforms as well, and might share more insights about your product or your service, giving you feedback, so you can gain a lot of consumer insights as well. And finally, you just have generally more control because you are the one that basically allows who can be in that private group and who is not, basically, who's not invited. Perfect. So the final step is monitor, analyze, and repeat, and that's all about basically reporting, which we touched on last week, and we went through all of the metrics last week. I've put them in again here in this presentation. But before you sort of begin with your social media strategy, with monitoring, analyzing, everything, definitely assign responsibilities first. So make sure everyone's clear on what their responsibilities are within this whole social media marketing plan. Who's going to be posting, who's going to be engaging, who's going to be sort of going out and, replying to those direct messages. So assign clear responsibilities to make sure that there's always going to be someone at hand, and they know exactly when they're supposed to be logged in and what they're supposed to be doing. Number 2 is make sure your notifications are turned on. Don't wait until you go in and manually check if anybody's mentioned you, if there's things like that. Keep your notifications on. That's really important because, like we mentioned earlier, the speed at which you reply to your customers is really important. So you don't want to sit on. Like we said earlier, some automation can help with that, but the majority of it cannot be automated. So you will still need to be on hand to respond, especially when the comments are kind of urgent or negative. Number 3 is use UTM links. So obviously before you can even track anything, especially if you're going to be sending traffic to your sites, use UTM links for that so that you can actually measure how much traffic you've received from that platform. Make sure that you've selected your reporting metrics and your KPIs, because again, that way you can pre-prepare your report and know exactly what are the metrics that you're going to be reporting on from the beginning. Remember to use hashtags, because hashtags will also allow you to report, especially if that's some of the metrics related to hashtags are relevant to you. So use hashtags when you can so that you can monitor stuff in more detail. And then set up your social link listening tools and make sure that all of that is kind of ready to go before you actually begin. So here are some of the lists of some of the KPIs that we tend to use depending on the different objectives. This is exactly the same as what we put in last week. So again, you can pick and choose some of these metrics depending on what you want to achieve, or there might be more, but it's definitely important to make sure you've selected what it is that you want to be reporting on and be ready to sort of make sure that you can measure it all. Finally, test, and repeat. That's going to work. So try everything. Be very specific when it comes to reporting. That will then allow you to really understand which tactics work and which tactics don't. which will allow you to amend your plan, amend the content, and continuously test. Don't test too many things at once, because if you're testing too many things at once, it becomes really difficult to attribute sort of the performance to a specific kind of variable. So if you're testing out the best time, don't be too crazy with testing out different types of content. So try to keep the content as similar as possible within different times. Then you'll know which time is more relevant. Then you move on to the second step, which is testing out, let's say, the content type, video versus, let's say, video feed versus stories. And then you can start testing different things, but do them one at a time so that you're really able to understand the result of that. And basically the whole project. So just a quick recap: number 1 is setting your goals, 2 is knowing your audience, 3 is auditing everything that you already have, 4 is competitor research and social listening, 5 is making sure your profiles are ready, finding inspiration of content, creating your calendar, adjusting and publishing, engaging, and then reporting, testing, monitoring, and repeating that whole cycle again.
Okay, so we're going to just cover a couple common mistakes and best practices for social. These we've already discussed, so just be a quick recap, and there's a couple extra just thrown in here. So common mistakes, scoping and tricks where they don't match your business goal. So like I said at the start, you might be really focusing on your follower count and your number of likes, but ultimately might not be aiming for more sales, etc. Secondly, not knowing your audience. So you might not be necessarily the right place, across the platforms, you need to understand them, where they are, and what they're using different platforms for, before you really set your content calendar. Thirdly is having fake followers. So this is quite brands would buy followers so it looks better for them, trustful as a brand. Next is dealing with negative feedback. So it's recommended that you try to always give some response, because it can be seen badly if you don't. But always it's important to, again, obviously stay professional, not react in a bad way to them. And lastly is content spamming. So the more you put out isn't necessarily always good. You should kind of track and analyze what is the right amount of content and how often you should be posting on different platforms. So moving on to the best practices. So include social media buttons where you can. So maybe on your website, on your blog content, on your email marketing, you have these links to go onto your social profiles and to follow you there. Know your aspect ratios and character limits. Again, just good practice to make sure everything is actually being published the way you want it to. So kind of your work isn't essentially ruined by that. Use hashtags. I guess across almost all content, you can use a hashtag for a specific campaign to track the effectiveness of that, or just more general brand hashtags, or something which relates to kind of current affairs. Next is keep consistent. Again, like we said with tone of voice, it's important to kind of feel like it's your brand across all platforms, rather than being a separate person running each of the different ones, even if that is the case. And the next one is stay updated on your industry. Again, something might happen which is important for you to respond to, or whether that's creating, I don't know, a blog article, or just writing some sort of status, or getting involved in certain conversations. It's important to stay up to date with relevant news and events happening in your industry. Vary your content, make use of video stories, threads, live streaming. Again, this will vary between each platform you're using. It depends on what your audience engage with, especially. If that kind of links to the next point of check analytics. So through this, you can see what formats are working better for you, and I guess focus on them more. Next is engage, as Nat was saying. Social media isn't always about kind of voicing your brand. It's about engaging with people who are already talking about you, or maybe your competitors, to build those deeper relationships, to essentially maybe drive them to a sale, or just get them talking more and more about your brands. Collaborate with influencers. Again, you want them to kind of hopefully talk positively about your brand, and effect on all of their followers. You're sharing and user-generated content to, again, share your brands, maybe get known to more people and get them engaging with your content. And lastly, run social media adverts, which I think Nat is going to go into in a bit more detail on the next slides. So I'll pass that to her.
Yeah, cool. So these are some tools that are available for you guys to use. At the end of every one of our workshops, we like to provide you guys with a list of tools. We've categorized them this time around, so you have some free social listening tools there, like Google Alerts, Hashtagify, Social Mention, TweetDeck, etc. You've got some paid for versions, but I think you guys also have your own, so you probably don't need them. Some community management tools. We mainly use Hootsuite. We've used Hootsuite a lot, and we've recently been using Sprout now. But there's also other ones like Spreadfast and Lithium, etc. And then there's some influence management tools. Oops. And then in the next slide as well, there's some useful tools that we to actually put together some of your content in a visual way, because essentially you don't really need to have access to really fancy design platforms to be able to do that. There's loads of tools out there that allow you to sort of turn some of your content into visual content that you can share. Some stock photography tools that you can use. I think some of these we use and are free. So it's great if you lack any assets or imagery to use. Some video creation tools as well. Again, you don't need a fancy video production company to help you with that. You can also do some of these yourselves using some of these tools that we've shared here. And here are also some analytics tools that help you track and monitor your social media posts and report on it. So finally, we just wanted to quickly touch on how you can combine paid advertising to help with your organic social strategy. Next week, we're going to cover paid advertising, paid social media advertising in a lot more detail. So this is not going to go into any detail at all. It's just going to show how important it can be to really use paid advertising to support. So this is actually a real life example for one of your existing customers that we're helping to work with at the moment. So that specific customer is very much a B2B client, very, very niche. So initially you think, oh, there's not a lot of opportunity for us out there. We're very niche, we're very specific. But when you actually create a target audience for that on that specific channel, you realize that the potential reach is huge. So that specific LinkedIn client, they have 11,000 followers. So it means that basically their reach should be around that amount. Obviously, you're not going to reach all of your followers at once, even when you post, because not everyone's going to be active at the same time. And they might not just scroll down enough to see your post. And also, you might actually reach some people that aren't following you through the hashtags and the different tactics that you can use, but that's going to be quite limited. But when you look at the actual target audience, when you break it down by target locations, relevant job titles, like all of the relevant metrics that form your potential audience, that's just for one of the industries that they operate in, not the whole company. You nearly have 1 million potential reach. So it's 960,000 potential LinkedIn members that you can reach through paid advertising. So when you actually see the scale of how many people you can reach by putting a little bit of budget behind your posts, it can really, really help you widen your reach and to allow you to take your organic posts a step further. In this slide as well, we wanted to show you a MintTwist example. So one of our clients, we manage both paid social media ads for them and their organic social media ads for them. And you can see here, you can barely see it actually, at the very bottom, it's in green. That's the number of organic impressions that the social media posts are doing. Now, do bear in mind, we're just starting out with this client. Some of their profiles, I think, started at 0. So we are building it, but that emphasizes how important it is to actually use paid advertising, especially at the beginning when you're starting out with your social media strategy, because at the beginning, you're not going to have a lot of followers. So your reach is going to be so incredibly limited. And the only way to actually get it reaching your relevant audience is to put a little bit of budget behind it. And also with paid advertising, the impressions, the frequency is multiple. So normally when a user sees an organic ad, they see it once and then it kind of gets lost in your feed. Once they've seen it, once it served its impression, it kind of disappears. Whereas with a paid ad, you're going to get multiple impressions because of the frequency. So the ad will continue to run and will continue to serve impressions to people even after they've seen it one time. And sometimes it does require a user to see an ad multiple times or a post multiple times before they actually start engaging with it or do the actions that we want them to do. So that's why also it's really important to use paid advertising. And you can see here the impressions difference is just huge. So in next week's presentation, we'll definitely go into this in a lot more detail, and we'll take you step by step on how we approach paid advertising. So that was it.